capacitors. These are in a metal box. There's tar underneath. These are out of the Crosley 59, which is a showable, one of the retrofit radios. There was plenty of room under the chassis once I removed these. These were riveted in with brass rivet. And they were, a couple of them were shorter and leaky, so I just punched the rivets, drilled them out, and decided to leave them out and just put capacitors in their place. And it was a TRF radio and it worked fine afterwards once it was all fixed up. But again, just using a heat gun, heat it up, pop it out. You can put new capacitors in there if you want, make it look original, put it back in, and
John, what's the stuff you're going to be melting out?
it's a tar finish. It's black tar.
No.
And that's all it is. You want to be careful not to use too much heat because it will catch fire. Years ago, I'm sorry?
Did you do it without thumbs?
If you use a heat gun, you're just doing it for a few moments, and we're going to demonstrate here how we're rebuilding it. So this is not just, this is going to be hands-on here, folks. I know it's kind of small for you folks sitting in the back. It doesn't create that much fumes. There's auto effect. Now, of course, well, I mean, 20 years ago, I worked at Computer Power in Highbridge, and we made power supplies. And one of the power supplies they made were for swimming pools, little lights in the pool. And they put a transformer in a metal box, and they had to pour tar over it and seal it. It was the same thing this stuff is. And then it was fine. Sometimes they heat the tar container up a little bit too much. Next thing you know, we got flames coming out of the top. And of course, some of the people that work at Computer Power are volunteer firemen. They were all over it real quick and put it out. But same thing can happen here.
John, can I just make one
Sure.
comment? Some people get over fancy and put the tar back in after they make the change. A, you don't need it because nobody's going to look inside. Okay. And the second thing is that nowadays a substitute for tar, that's a black substance that they use, usually carbon. And you put carbon back in, and basically you short out the leads to the case. So you get the tar out, you put the caps in, and just stuff paper or something else in there. Don't try to.
You don't even have to stuff paper.
Or just leave it alone.
Just wire it in. You can put some spaghetti on the lead so that we short out against the case. Usually the case itself is round. Like this particular capacitor, you have 2 capacitors in one. You have 2 separate leads here, and the other end is connected to the case, which is rounded. So normally you don't have to repack it. I would recommend it. Yes?
Well, these things usually made by the radio manufacturers themselves, or they buy them from a capacitor company.
Well, this is a micromold.
Oh.
So this particular one was the Crosley used was.
How about Philco?
Philco, I believe, made their own, but Philco made this one. Yeah, they did. It's not involved with capacitor. I mean, years ago, I ran into a truck driver out of York, Pennsylvania, and one of their plants. They made the wood cabinets. They made 4,000 cabinets a day. Wood cabinets. But that was just one manufacturer. But there's other capacitors too. Dealing with Philco, going along a couple of the block capacitors which we're going to rebuild here. But Philco only had these little metal capacitors, little metal case. And this is a little bit different. This one isn't filled with tar, but it's just a tip case. It's crimped, and one end is soldered. You just solder it, unroll it like you would a tuna can, and to put 2 capacitors inside. Sometimes, because you see how long the leads are, sometimes it's not really advantageous to try and put a capacitor in the radio and wire because of space limitations. Some of the early Philcos, you know how shallow the chassis were, and you have a big metal plate underneath. And there are part numbers on the side of these parts. including the big light capacitors, which means Greek to us. How many, like myself, I use a writer's manual. And you go look in there, and it'll say part, you look at the capacitor, and it'll say part number and a price, and it'll tell you what the value is. Or how it's wired up internally.
Very often it's illegible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Even some of the Philco manuals that have some of the schematics is difficult to figure out what this part is and its value. Fortunately, there was a fellow named Ray Midcliffe who wrote a manual, and what it is just simply you look up the number on the side, look up in the manual here, and it'll tell you what the parts are internally, and sometimes there were resistors in there, not just capacitors, and some of the early blocks had resistors in them, and then it has a little tutorial that you look up and it'll tell you what, how it's wired to what terminal. Okay? This is an earlier manual. There were other parts such as I mentioned, these tin can capacitors, and also tone controls. You see they have a set of tone controls, usually 2 or 3 position switch. And they had capacitors in there in a little tray. I couldn't find an example for tonight, and I won't pick it up. I couldn't find it, sorry. But basically it's the same thing. You just have tar in there, you heat it up, pump it out, put the capacitors in, solder it in, put leads on it, and you're done. I did that with Phil's radio. It's probably one of the reasons it's still not working. Along the way, in the flea markets, I just mentioned this, somebody had copies of Philco parts catalogs, one from 1935-38, which explained what some of these numbers were and what the values were. And then Ray decided to update his book and put this book out, which also has resistors, capacitors, everything but the trimmer capacitors.
I'm sorry, does that supersede his first book?
It supersedes his first book. It has much more information.
So you need the first book.
You don't need the first book. So if you guys are really serious about it, then yeah, I got this from Antique Electronics out at the end. But what I'm going to do, because you guys, who's in charge of books and stuff when we have the Saturday meeting?
Usually people just bring them in on the...
Okay, because what I want to do is I made Xerox copies of the important parts. I can pass these around. Don't look on the back, I recycled some paper from my deadline. Has some non-radio stuff on the back. But it lists the number, the capacity, and all together with this book. I'm going to donate it to the club, so if you folks want to bring a Philco radio in here and you're having problems with it, be able to look it up. Okay? Couple of notes, and I'll show you how to resolve it real quick. This is the latest capacitor. We pass these around. Take a look at it.
So the Philco book has the Rosetta Stone for translating the numbers, the production numbers, to what the values are.
Right. And also, an example, this is a 3-terminal. What terminal is wired to what? Okay? That's important. Now, you're going to find some oddball values in here. They're going to be 0.09 microfarad. Well, 0.01 is going to work, or 0.1 is going to work. I have come across some examples where only one, where I'm always careful to look how it's wired as I'm taking it apart. It didn't match the tutorial in the book. It was off. I've also seen in the circuit where you look on the side, and the ones that are passing around, it's stamped in ink. It's the later ones, but the early ones were embossed. You look at the number, and you look at the circuit, you look at the schematic, and it's the wrong value. Now it calls for, let's say, 0.1, but yet the capacitor says it should be at 0.25. when you measure it with a capacitor meter, it's a 0.1. So apparently at the factory there were mistakes, and rather than chuck the part, they used it. They just used it and right out, and they never wrote over it. And I have found one example where the Bakelite block had two embossed, had two separate numbers, totally different, one on each side. So just be aware of that. Quality out of control, even back then.
John? One more.
Sure.
Somebody mentioned, what about the voltage rating too?
Voltage rating on these, 600.
Yeah, they'll, in some cases, it'll be lower. I mean, they'll be rated 300.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, they use the cheapest thing that they could get by with, okay? So a lot of times the voltage rating, depending on where the capacitor is used, is right on the edge of what it needs to be. So don't get skimpy. Just, I mean, if it says a 300 and that's what you got, go with a 600. It's probably, depending where it's used, you're right on the edge of the voltage rating.
I mean,
Well, the capacitor stock that we had.
Yeah, you should never, you should always use like 600.
John, the information that some of that was book is on the internet, on Chuck Schwartz, Philco server.
is it really? I
The
don't know.
pictures and the whole thing.
It doesn't have walls.
He doesn't have walls, but he has.
Yeah, there are a few capacitors that are listed in that he doesn't have information about. Either he has a number, there was no information available, or whatever. So you may encounter a non-volt. But usually with schematics, you might be able to figure it out. I mean, here's a prime example, something I picked up on the way down here, kind of strung out. Believe that, I got a picture of you. But, actually, believe it or not, this is one of my radios that I was having a garage sale and a fellow stopped by with his girlfriend and said, "Oh, I got a bunch of old junk radios in my cellar, and I'm not trying to pick them up and have you rid of them. This is one of them." So if you look, now it's hard to see, but all you see is resistors, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks. So you take a look at that, you look at your schematic, and what's the first thing you want to do? You want to fix it, you say forget it. So you're doing one of these things while trying to figure it out, ready to commit suicide. If you do one at a time, it's real easy. Just some solder wires. It's just a regular 1/4-inch nut driver to remove the screw, and the whole unit comes out. Some caution. Some of the blocks, the screw is the ground. All right, there's a ground, so make sure you have a good connection there. All right, an example that's being passed around, that has a ground as well. So sometimes the radio has noise, or it's just not operating. Just retighten those, the little screw up, and usually that'll work. Okay. Any questions so far? We're going to leave and we'll talk. My son. Okay. All right. Let's look up this number. Great, we can't read it. Who's got the other capacitor? I'm just going to look. Oh, good. It's a 3903 DG, which means it's a double. So just look it up in the book. What
do you mean it's
has two capacitors in one. The SG usually needs single, DG is double. All right. Again, be careful. Some of the earlier capacitors also had a resistor built in. Okay. 3903. Okay. I think it's DG. ODC. ODC. And it says F01. There we go. And in the back here, and this is the second edition. ODC. 3903 DG. 0.01, So it's two capacitors, 0.01 capacity. It shows how it's wired up internally. So we have two leads connected to grounding lug here, and one each lead to the center and the outer. Okay? So it tells us the value and how it's wired. With that, I'm ready to go to work. I tend to use a scribe, which you can pick up just about any place. I found this mechanic left it on the airplane. So needle nose, nice medium-sized needle nose pliers, Pretty Arts International, up on New Jersey.
John, have you ever paid retail for anything?
What's this?
What's that shirt?
Well, I'm hoping it doesn't do account for that. Okay. But generally what I do is I have my son hold the heat gun. I use needle nose pliers and I insert it where the screw goes. And I usually get, once it squeezed down, I will break the bagel light. Just goes good. He'll hold the gun. So I'm plugging in. You can tell us about yours. Okay. Well, everybody's moving back here. I haven't had one explode yet. I usually use a small screwdriver. There's sprinkler system here. I use a small screwdriver. I heat it up, scrape the layer off, heat it up a little more, scrape another layer off, and I usually use the scribe just to pull out the old capacitor. Well, it's still warm. Usually I use the paper towel while the bake light's still warm just to clean it up a little bit because it's going to drip a little bit. And scribe to clean up the holes where the leaves are going to come through. Now you can unsolder the leaves first. I don't. I just drag it out, and then I use the soldering iron to clean up the wires on terminals. And put the components in, solder it up. Ready to put it back in the set, and we're ready to go. Without further hesitation, because everybody's evacuated the area here. All right, now let's put it on the box. Now, if you don't have anybody at home to help you, you can use it, or if you don't have a heat gun, use a hair dryer, lay it on the table.
Sorry, son?
Yeah. My wife would like that. You can smell a little bit. It's starting to get a little bit soft. You will get some tar on your tools. It'll clean off very easily while it's still warm with a paper towel. Incidentally, there were some radios made, I've seen one of them, in the early 30s, where they filled the whole chassis with tar pitch. Yeah, I can't remember which model it was, but I have seen it. It weighed 150 pounds. It looked like a great little tombstone. If you try to pick it up, it's going to hurt you. The whole idea, obviously, was to try and seal the radio so that the components from going back and forth the kind of equipment that didn't happen. Again, you don't want to get this stuff on the floor, or you won't have a mechanism. You just want to go careful with it, necessary level pressure. Now, take about a quarter of an inch off, and we're down to the capacitor. Just want to keep that block up inside, and use the scribe. You can basically use anything, small screwdriver. Normally you don't get a smell, of course tonight I have to get on that, then you know you don't want to use the other. And that's all there is really to it for cleaning that out.
Can you read the value off the individual components themselves or the
Now, these, being this, I'll pass these around. The capacitors they use inside are just little paper capacitors. They don't have any value or anything marked on them, so the only way you're going to know is what's on the case itself. For the rest of they're very, very small. They're not, they say, you know, some of the capacitors are rated for 300, 400 volts, some 600. I pulled out where they're 4 paper. The only thing left to do, so I let this cool down a little bit, and I'll pass this around as it is. You see a little wire leaf coming out. It's fairly warm. You just take the solder, just a normal soldering iron, unsolder where the leads come through, use a solder sucker or braid, wherever you use those. Take off the little wire around the lead, insert your new capacitors into the bottom, solder to the proper terminal, and you're done. I could do that, you can see what it looks like inside. When you get done, all you'll see is 2 small capacitors inside, and you mount it back in the chassis. It's not going to look any different than when it was new. Except now you have it rebuilt with better components, and just wire the wires back up, so you're not going to have these hanging in the air. They're going to be on there. How long did it take me to do this? Not even 5 minutes.
In a typical Philco set, how many do you have to do?
Depending, well, this particular radio has 4 of them. On the bigger sets, 8, 10, 11, 2, you might have 10. So you figure in the afternoon, you could do it in a few hours, but if you take your time and you do it properly, you know, instead of cutting the wires, you just unsolder, unwind it, mark it, because I'm not the brightest bulb in the lamp factory. And just take your time.
Do one at a time.
Do one at a time. And again, double check the schematic. Double check when you look at the print, what's supposed to be. Verify it, that's what's supposed to be in the schematic, because I have found, like I said, a few that weren't the right part, but yet electrically it was. So the factory apparently didn't throw away the rejects when they misprinted them. And like I said, there was one that was embossed on both sides with 2 separate numbers. So I had to use the cool down and see what they'll find. For these capacitors, this one is fairly easy. I want you to take them home right. You have little tabs, open up. And all right, I can keep this one up. This one's pulled apart too. This one should, I have the end open. Once you heat it up, it should pull right out.
Did you know that, John?
While they're doing that, I'll just mention that after this we're going to have the 50-50 drawing, and we have some items that we're gonna auction off.
Yeah, I'll finish up. Some of these do have tar in them, but I've had some where it's just, they're just placed in there, there are no tar. I'll pass this around too, so you can see. Now, in the first manual, it doesn't list these capacitors. Okay. The second manual it does, but since I'm giving you the first manual and the copy of the pages, it does have these, including those little pesky trimmer capacitors, but sometimes short out. When you're trying to, you got the radio all ready to go, and you can't figure out why it doesn't work. You find out trimmer capacitors work, it's shorted. And I'm not an electrical engineer, so I can't figure it out. What it is, look up the schematic, what the hardware is, cross-check it, cross-reference it, but this would be the same thing, just heat it up, it pops out. Get that? Is there any questions or anything anybody want to add?
You were saying, did any other manufacturers use those bathtub capacitors?
Yes. Crossley did, Philco, obviously. Atwater Kent. Atwater Kent used a lot of capacitors, multi-capacitors in the can. They would have several in a small can, like about the size of the one that was passing around with many leads coming out. You can rebuild them. You can put newer components on the side and reuse, put it back in. It'll save a lot of space. It'll save trying to put all these little capacitors all over the place. Because usually it's very cramped space and not enough time to push to put it in. So that's how I do it.
Thanks, John.